Hello, I am Tamara Tirjik, Senior Localization Manager of Frontier Developments in Cambridge, UK, where my team manages the full localization pipeline of all our games developed internally and by third-party studios, as well as any publishing and marketing assets. With digital publishing and online stores available practically all over the world, it has never before been easier to set up your game for global success. But how do you choose the target regions and thus the target languages for your game? And what localization KPIs will you want to monitor once your game is out in the market? And why do we localize in the first place? Everybody speaks English anyway, right? Well, there are about 1.5 to 2 billion English speakers, out of which 400 million are native speakers, versus 2.5 billion gamers. And this latter number seems to increase quicker year after year than the former. So this is clearly not the case. A global survey done in 2014 by Common Sense Advisory suggests that the vast majority of people prefer products to be in their own language. They are more likely to buy again if there are post-sale services available in their language. And more than half of them would never buy at all if the website was only available in English. This country won't buy survey was repeated again this year with very similar results. Another research done exclusively in the European Union about the internet usage of the population shows that only a slight majority visits websites in a language other than their own. And the vast majority switches to their own language if available. Finally, almost half of the respondents have missed information online simply because it was not available in their own language. So it seems that German Chancellor Willy Brandt was onto something when he said, if I'm selling to you, I speak your language. If I'm buying, dann müssen Sie Deutsch sprechen. Then you need to talk to me in German. So, to summarize, why do we localize our games and websites? It's not just we're lingophiles, which we localization folk actually tend to be. First of all, it builds trust. As we've seen from the studies, your audience will trust you and your product more if you approach them in their own language. 2, to show your players that you care about them, that they are important to you, that you are willing to make this effort for them. 3, it is still one of the easiest ways to tap into additional revenue streams. Localization is also seen as a gateway to new market opportunities and future growth. And last but not least, presenting products and information in a certain language can be a legal requirement for marketing your product. So, now that we have a case for localization in general, the question arises how to pick the languages we want to support in our game out of the 7,000 or so languages that are spoken on this planet. There are a number of things to consider. The genre of your game, the level of English spoken in certain target markets, the content of the game, whether it's connected to a licensed IP, the platform on which it's going to be published on, the demography of the players, the eco-political situation of the country, and the monetization model. What are the regions where games like yours tend to be popular? Role-playing games tend to be popular in Asia Pacific. MMOs and FPSs normally do well in Russia. The US is a great market for casual and social casino games. And strategy and simulation games are popular in Europe and the Middle East. How well do they speak English in your target region? In the Nordic countries and the Netherlands, people in general would have little problem understanding and enjoying your game in English. Meanwhile, in our classic fixed countries, that is France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, English proficiency is lower. And even if it's higher in Germany, we've seen that they do expect to consume content in their own language. And let's not forget that these numbers show the percentage of the population who can hold a conversation in English. And being able to ask for a pint in a pub or discuss the weather is not the same as understanding how the mass of their spaceship and the frame shift drive installed would influence the jump range when they try to perform a hyperspace jump, to quote an example from our game Elite Dangerous. Will you need to tick countries off your list of potential markets because your content is sensitive? Do you discuss religious or spiritual matters in a way that might not be appropriate for certain cultures? Does your game touch on historical or geopolitical matters? If you remember, until very recently, the swastika was forbidden to use in entertainment products in Germany. And even now, there are strict guidelines about how you can discuss Nazism there. And also remember that many countries still have border disputes. Some countries are not recognized by others. And historical events can have completely different outcomes and interpretations in different countries. Do you feature any sexuality in your game? The acceptable level of nudity varies by regions, and there are cultures where discussing, for example, homosexuality is completely unacceptable. How do you approach criminal acts such as drug usage, smuggling, stealing, violence? If you work with a licensed IP based on a film or a comic book franchise, you will want to do some research to understand where this franchise is well known and loved. What platform are you publishing your game on? In Western Europe and North America, 60 to 70% of the players would be on console. In Eastern Europe and Russia, players prefer PC. In Asia Pacific, the bulk of your players will be on mobile devices. And in South America, the situation is quite even. So 1/3 would be on console, 1/3 on PC, and 1/3 on mobile. Does the target demography of your game match the demography of player base in a given country? Who are they? What's their gender, their age, their habits? What is the eco-political situation in the target country? Does your game need to go through a formal approval process, for example, by a ratings agency or a government body, as in China? Is there any applicable legislation on gambling mechanics such as loot boxes or responsible gaming regulations that you need to comply with? Is the country an economic boom or in depression? Do your potential players have enough disposable income to spend on and in your game? Are there any applicable taxes, such as custom duties on gaming consoles, making them more expensive for the players to buy? Would your monetization model work well, or will you need to adapt it to suit the local preference? Right then, we have picked our target markets and corresponding languages. We have finished localizing and publishing our game, so what's next? Well, we obviously want to follow up on how well our game performs in those markets we carefully chose for it. Disclaimer, all of the following charts and data that I will present are mere illustrations. They were invented by me and they do not reflect any actual figures from any real game. So, one of the basic things we'll want to monitor is the number of monthly and daily active users in each target country, which reflects the growth and retention rates across the regions. Here, our fictitious game shows a very healthy increase in player numbers month after month. The second key metric would obviously be the game sales. We see that more than half of our sales come from the US, but Germany and especially China are going strong too. Over time, we can see that our overall sales fell in the second month after the initial excitement of the launch, then slightly increased in the third month, maybe indicating a successful promotion that we ran. A slightly different representation shows how the per country distribution of the sales change over time, i.e. the orange bar showing the share of Chinese sales increased in the second month. So we might have done a local campaign there for the Lunar New Year. Looking at these charts, it's easy to say, yay, we're making a lot of money. But are we? In addition to examining the revenue side, we need to balance it out with the localization cost. This can be achieved by the return on the localization investment. This is the classic ROI formula, so let's see what it can tell us. In ROI, 0% normally means that we broke even. Negative numbers, such as the one we see for Brazilian Portuguese here, mean that we're currently losing money on that language. And we want to see big, fat, positive numbers there, like for Germany or even better for China. When choosing a language, it's good to establish the ROI expectations first. So, what kind of ROI do we expect from each language? It's quite unrealistic to expect a small country such as Poland to generate an ROI as big as China, which is currently the second biggest gaming market globally. The ROI also has a temporal dimension. So when do we want to break even in order to declare the language successful? Already in the pre-order phase? Within a month after release? Within 3 months? Finally, as games are now often released as a service, and they will have a continuous injection of new content, it is good to understand what kind of ROI we expect to see after release to rest assured that it will pay off to keep on supporting that language in what will be years to come, hopefully. So we have seen some lovely sales from Germany and China, but does our localization really add value to the players? Do my German players play in German? This chart shows the language choices of players from each target country. And players from the US would predominantly play in English. No big surprises there, right? My Chinese and Brazilian players predominantly prefer to play in their own language, so would the Germans. And if we remember the map showing the English proficiency in Europe, it should not come as a shock to see that half of the players of our fictional game in Sweden prefer to play in English rather than in Swedish. And finally, the A/B comparison, also called bucket testing. This method would normally be a controlled experiment where only one single variable is changed in the two test scenarios and everything else remains the same. This allows us to understand how tweaking that one single variable, in our case the language support, would affect the outcome, i.e. the sales or the player numbers from a certain region. Of course, such lab-like circumstances are rather challenging to create in game publishing, but let's have a look at this example. We have a game ingeniously titled as Game 1, which is translated into Chinese, German, and Brazilian Portuguese. We also have a very similar game, the equally ingeniously titled Game 2, where in addition to these three languages, we also add support for Swedish, French, and Hungarian. 1 month after the release of each, we have a look at the sales coming from these 6 countries. The sales look very similar in China, Germany, and Brazil, so the 3 languages that are supported in both games. So we can definitely assume that the games are indeed similar and no other variable changed significantly. But what about the 3 new languages? In Swedish sales, we see very little difference, so we can conclude that language support did not have a significant impact on the reception on Sweden, and these players would have probably bought it even without the Swedish translation. In France, we can see that our sales have grown 5-fold and are now almost on the German levels, so adding this language was clearly a very good call. And we also see a significant increase in the number of Hungarian players, but it's a small market, so even these increased sales might not be enough to cover the localization costs if our game 2, for example, is a text-heavy, story-driven adventure game. I hope you have found these ideas and examples thought-provoking and useful, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions or comments. Thank you.